Well, because web uses everybody else's IDEs. So they, like
No.
Eclipse, like the Eclipse IDE or Aptana or any of these other ones, they all started off based on using Java or C Sharp or one of these other IDEs, and all they do is shoehorn PHP support and everything else into it.
Did you catch all that? Did you understand it? What you're hearing is commonly referred to as jargon, lingo, and lexicon. So why use such complicated words? Do they mean something, or are game developers just trying to confuse us and sound smart? Why do the industries of technology and science use so much jargon, lingo, and lexicon? Couldn't people just use simple words to describe complexity? The fact is, jargon is crucial to understanding technological and scientific points. They aren't just fancy words people use to sound smart, they mean something very particular to those within a field of study using them. It seems confusing to those not part of an industry, and to some like unnecessary elitism. This is not the case, however. When jargon is used, it's because those words cannot be substituted without changing the fundamental meaning of a sentence or idea. In other words, using other words just doesn't have the same impact of meaning that jargon does. And so, understanding terms and terminology is important because often people in the game development industry use them to convey very particular concepts whose complexity requires jargon to properly describe in detail. In our first topic of this module, we will discuss common terminology and acronyms in the video game development. These are core terms we will hear a lot during the course of game development. In our second topic, we will explore common tools and software used to develop video games. Here we will briefly cover some of the software programs that are used to make video games. Together, these topics will serve as a primer for understanding video game industry jargon and terminology. As we explore new modules, new terms and vocabulary will be added to our lexicon, giving us greater understanding of video game industry terminology. Hello, and welcome to our panel discussion on common terminology used in video game development. In this topic, we are going to launch into a discussion on common terminology used in video game development with some working professionals in the video game industry. Before we do, though, we need to know what an acronym is. Acronyms are actually quite common everywhere we look. An acronym is when a word is formed from the first letters of words in a phrase to create a new word or term that now defines the phrase. Confusing? Not so much when we look at some examples. So some acronyms become so commonly used we begin to see the acronym as the word itself. For example, the word SCUBA. SCUBA is an acronym that stands for Self-Contained Underwater Breathing Apparatus. Laser is another word that's an acronym, formed from the phrase light amplification by the stimulated emission of radiation. Okay, that one cheats a little bit by ignoring some smaller words, but it's typical of acronyms. Simple, right? So now let's turn to our panel and talk a little bit about some terminology that will be used throughout the software industry. Welcome, panel. Why don't you all introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Zach. I'm the web developer here at Garage Games.
I'm Ray. I'm the QA tester.
I'm Ron, and I'm a graphics programmer.
Excellent. So here's the first industry acronym for the panel. What does IDE stand for?
That's an integrated development environment. It usually is a piece of software that groups a whole bunch of development tools together into one program.
Is that something you use a lot?
It's something I use every day.
Yeah, I use an IDE to manage all my code, to help me write and check all my code for errors. It helps me combine a bunch of tools into one thing. I use it for a bunch of different languages, even HTML, PHP, all that kind of stuff.
And I also use it for QA and helping to debug and find more information from the debugging tools.
Okay, on to the next one. What is an API?
That's an application programming interface. It's a way for software to expose functionality to other developers. You would expose a set of functions that let other developers use your software. That's what an API is for.
Yeah, we use APIs in web development to access third-party services like Facebook, even third-party video streaming services and things like that.
So yeah, and like Google Analytics or tying into Google, meeting places or whatever, you'd use an API for Google to access that functionality.
Okay, how about an SDK? What is that?
That is a software development kit. Maybe Ron can elaborate more on that.
Software development kit is usually just a bunch of tools and libraries used for developing software for a specific platform. There's software development kits for all sorts of different platforms that you may be targeting.
Like there's one Sony has one for PS4, or Microsoft has one for Xbox, Xbox One. It's the libraries that you need to interface with the hardware.
Okay, on to the next one. What does SCM stand for, and how do you use them?
An SCM is a source control management system. We use it like GitHub or Subversion or Git to be more specific. And these are repositories and file systems that track changes to code from a number of different people. We can all collaborate on a single code base and not have to worry about overwriting each other's files. We can use it to review each other's code to make sure that we didn't make mistakes, or that if other people made mistakes, it's easier to find.
Yeah, in QA we use it to track changes. So if a bug comes up that's new that we haven't seen before, then we can go back through the different versions and use the file history to sync to different versions of the game and find when that bug was introduced.
All right, this next one is not software, but what does GDD stand for?
GDD is a game design document that describes how a game is supposed to work. It gives you all the functionality and features of the game, how the characters are, and how they interact, and how the gameplay works. All of the features of the game go into the game design document. It's just an overall description as if you were playing the game, but without actually playing the game. It's all in a document.
Yeah, in QA we use GDD to give us a guide on what functionality is supposed to be there. So you have a character, well, what should the character do? What buttons should do to jump? What buttons should shoot? If that's all lined out, then we know how to test what we're going to test.
And so, what is a TDD then?
A TDD is a technical design document. It's very similar to the GDD, except for it goes a little bit more in depth. In the TDD, you actually take those items that are in the GDD that describe what you're supposed to do, and actually the TDD tells you, would outline specifically how to do it. Let's say you want to press A to jump. Well, the TDD tells you that you need to use these libraries to include in order to be able to create the jump action, and specifically lays out how you're going to achieve that function in a technical manner.
Well, thank you, panel. That's all the time we have for today, but we will see you again in our next video where we will discuss commonly used software and tools in the video game industry. Hello, we're here again with our panel of video game industry experts, and we are going to continue with our conversation on terminology, this time focusing on some common tools and software used by developers. So once again, welcome, panel. And let's get started by talking about some of the common tools and software that you use in your day-to-day work. So Ron, we'll begin with you. As a graphics programmer, what tools do you use most?
I mostly use Visual Studio. It's my primary tool for all of my code development, debugging, and editing, and management of the game. I'll also use other tools sometimes, such as Photoshop and Maya and Pix for graphics debugging.
You ever use any art programs?
Yeah, Photoshop and Maya are art programs, and I'll use them to create my own art or teach artists how to get the art in the format that I need it in for the game.
But you're not actually an artist?
No, I'm not an artist, not by any means.
But you find yourself having to do art a lot?
Art that probably shouldn't be shown to anybody, yeah.
Zach, you are a web developer in video game industry. What kind of IDEs do you use most?
Well, I'd say the IDE of choice for me is NetBeans. I like it because NetBeans is a central place that contains all the tools I use on a regular basis to do web development. It's got Java. It handles JavaScript, HTML, CSS, PHP, and these are all languages that I use to generate code for video games made online. And it also manages a lot of the tools I need to work in a local environment. So it handles Vagrant, which launches my Apache servers. And on top of that, it's got integrated support for SEM so that I can commit and push up my changes to a central repository. And then if anybody else makes changes to my code, I can pull it back down, and I don't have to worry about handling any command line stuff.
Ray, can you tell us a little bit about source control tools and what they do?
Yeah, the source control tool that we use most here is GitHub or Git, and that stores everything up on GitHub. We use that to track our changes, to store all our source files, our art files, all the source materials that make up the game. I use it mostly to, pull the latest changes and make sure I'm up to date so that while I'm QAing the latest stuff. I also use it to go back in time and find out when a new issue was, introduced into the code, or to find out who made changes, and who I should assign a bug to because what they did caused the issue.
Okay, how about game engines? What are they, and do any of you use them?
Game engine is a piece of software that is geared towards making a game. It does a whole bunch of stuff that a game needs to be able to do. It's a good starting point to start your project from, a game engine that's already existing, because a lot of the underlying foundation has been done for you. We use game engines all the time, depending on which game we're making and what we need. Game engines such as Unity or Unreal or Monogame. We pick up whichever one we need for whichever project we're working on.
Yeah, and I use game engines in web development too to build games. There's JavaScript game engines. There's Node game engines. I use different game engines to help me augment the tasks I need to do when building a visual game. So they can handle things like communication back and forth to a server, even for the web. Handle simple things like looping audio and looping animations. So it saves a lot of work for me.
Well, thank you, panel, for helping explain some of the common tools and software used in video games and the software development industry. Thank you.